When I was a little boy, in the fall of the year, when the leaves were falling in Georgia, which we actually had trees there, my next door neighbor was named Ahaz McPherson, Mr. Mack, and I can remember when I was just a little guy, he would take his radio and plug it in and set it on the front porch, and he would be raking leaves and we'd be jumping in the piles of leaves, but the radio would be blaring Larry Munson as he would broadcast the University of Georgia Bulldogs football games. It's just a memory I have. It's in my blood. So that's one reason I'm so excited about today's chapel. Mr. Greg Sankey is a native of Auburn, New York. He earned his master's degree from Syracuse University and his undergraduate degree from the State University of New York College at Cortland. After serving with the Southeastern Conference for a number of years, Mr. Sankey became the 8th commissioner in 2015 of the SEC, and under his leadership, the conference has won 19 national championships in 12 different sports. The SEC is the first conference to place 2 of its teams in the college football national championship game, which it did during the Alabama-Georgia matchup this past January. Go Dogs. Greg and his wife of nearly 30 years, Kathy, reside in Birmingham, Alabama, and have 2 adult daughters, Hannah, a Louisville, Kentucky meteorologist, and Mariah, a recent graduate of Wheaton College. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Greg Sankey to our chapel today.
Good morning. Oh, an interactive crowd. So just out of curiosity, a couple questions. Any Wheaton College graduates in the crowd, but perchance? Okay. 2, and several others embarrassed to say. My daughter had an incredible experience at Wheaton College, and we're grateful for the setting of higher education, much like this one, that builds into the lives of people like you're experiencing here. Any graduates of Southeastern Conference universities in the room? So you can see by number the spiritual impact of the SEC within the room. You know, this is one of those activities that on my side of the phone call or the email, I think this was an email, you read the email and then you read it again, an invitation to speak at Dallas Theological Seminary. And then you kind of slump back in your chair and are like, what in the world? Because my days are filled with activities around sports, with lawyers, with television executives and agreements, and the days go by. My days begin at 4:40 a.m. And you should ask, well, why not 4:30? Because I believe fundamentally the most important 10 minutes of sleep in your day are the last 10 minutes of sleep. And I can work out from 5:15 to 6 and clean up, and then I have about an hour of my time before I go in, and then the day's gone. And so in the middle of one of those days, I have no idea what the crisis may have been in that moment. To have an email to be invited to speak here is one that is like really cool. And then as I started processing what's happening, like, wow, maybe I should have thought through that in a little bit greater depth. Because I'm standing here speaking at Dallas Theological Seminary to faculty who are theologians, to aspiring theologians, to struggling theologians, and of course to the really struggling theologians, which is probably most of you in the room. I mean, what could go wrong when I start speaking about Scripture this morning with me in front of you? It's intimidating because I looked through your curriculum. I visited the website over the last couple of weeks because that's like the easy way to prepare. So you're going to study sanctification and ecclesiology, Trinitarianism. My personal favorite list from a curriculum standpoint is this list, right? NT 101. Anyone know what that is? Elements of Greek. Ironically, the same name for NT 102. So if you didn't get it right the first time, we're going to take a second whack at you. followed passionately by NT 103. We've moved past the elements, and now we're into intermediate. So the training wheels are still on. They're just a little bit more loosely coupled to the frame of the bicycle. Then there's NT 205, Advanced Greek Grammar. I'm certain that the line at registration is out the door and around the building. So once you're through that, it's NT 210, Rapid Greek Reading. What I wish is we had video of the faculty committee debating that title. Why don't we just call it Greek reading? No, it's rapid Greek reading. And the students, of course, know it as slow and painful Greek reading, but something we must have to do. Then there's NT 220, Discourse Features of New Testament Greek. And then my personal favorite, given that I'm from Auburn, New York, and I live in Birmingham, Alabama, NT 230, Greek Accents. Which wouldn't make much sense, but I vacationed in Ireland the last 2 years and have had the same driver explaining how they can tell in Northern Ireland he's from Southern Ireland. He says, it's because of my accent, which makes no sense to me in that context. But keep in mind, I forget weekly to keep the feta cheese off of my Greek salad. So the notion of endeavoring an elements, intermediate, advanced, rapid discourse features in Greek accents is completely foreign to me. You're engaged in something incredibly important, in my view, and that is the learning, the discussion, the debate around faith. It's something in which I don't dwell every day, but I do. And I skipped to the next part of my notes because I forgot one more entertaining piece of curriculum, and I want to come back to that because my first job out of college was I was the director of intramural sports at a place called Utica College in Utica, New York. Anybody ever been to Utica, New York? There's a few that have, hopefully during the summertime. What I learned then is that every step of my career has prepared me for where I am in different ways. So I was the director of intramural sports, about 1,200 students at the time, and I learned an incredible principle, which is when you are 19 or 20 years old playing in an intramural league, you will tear your friend's arms off to capture a $3.50 intramural championship t-shirt. And if that's the case at 19 and 20 years old, why should I be surprised when adults in their 40s, 50s, and 60s confront ethical challenges in the competitive arena every day? But that got a lot more serious because the issue that I have is in the master's programs here, I notice there's a master's of theology, right? And then there's a master's of sacred theology, which raises the issue of, do you have intramurals here at Dallas Theological Seminary? And is there a Masters of Theology team and a Masters of Sacred Theology team? And does everybody know when the pregame prayer is assigned to the Masters of Sacred Theology students, it's at least 15 minutes longer than those studying the Masters of Theology? I mean, what can go wrong? Tomorrow, while you're discussing postmodernism, apologetics, and soteriology, I have a 2-hour meeting starting at 7:30 on our bowl game roster. But coming back to realities, I hold this institution in incredibly high esteem because this morning I shared with the pastor of the church when I lived in Dallas. I lived in the Plano-Allen area for 11 years. I attended what is now known as Legacy Church, was then Legacy Drive Baptist Church. And in October of 1995, our pastor called us to a week of prayer. Just a little thing. 7 days, 24 hours a day, somebody in the sanctuary praying. And it could be multiple people, could be families. I showed up one day from 1 a.m. to 2 a.m. just because I was a deacon and it wasn't filled up and I had to. And lo and behold, very spiritual, wasn't it? Lo and behold, at 2 a.m., when my turn was done and I survived that hour, nobody showed. Nobody showed at 3 a.m. Nobody showed at 4 a.m. And so from 1 to 5, I had 4 hours of prayer, which I'd never done before. And I'll be honest with you, I've never done since. But it produced an outcome, one of which was I stood up in front of the church the next Sunday morning and told about being at a football game the night before, because I worked in college sports even then. I was in Lake Charles, Louisiana at a football game at McNeese State University, thinking on Saturday night about being in church. In our culture, it's the opposite. Most people are in church thinking about the football game later that day. But that's how persuasive, working in sports, spending those 4 hours, and there were other moments of prayer that week as well. At the end of that, I had been toying with this idea of should I enroll in seminary. A guy walked up and said, if you'll do this, I'll pay for it. I visited here in a chapel in the spring of 1996, which is an incredibly interesting intersection of my life. So part of the intimidation factor is the chapel speaker that morning was none other than Charles Swindoll, who I'd heard on the radio and read all the books, and now it's me. I met Darrell Bach, who doesn't remember that, but I do, because like every Bible translation I ever saw since then has his name in, and so there are plenty of people angry at him, which is a comfort given the amount of internet anger directed towards me on Saturdays in the fall. And it led to me enrolling here in 2 distance learning courses. One was on Psalms, and the other one I don't remember, because the course in Psalms, I made it to Blessed is the man in Psalm 1. And that was as far as I was going to get, because I had a textbook about that thick that went into Hebrew. And God told me, I'm not calling you to ministry in this form. And that's okay. Because what's amazing is that year, in the spring of 1996, where I became commissioner of something called the Southeastern Conference, and there's probably a few alums of those universities in here. I was 31 years old. It was way too early. But it was an incredible learning experience. And in your ministry, you're going to have those opportunities, and you walk out of here, and you're going to look back in 20 years, and you're going to say, wow, what I learned in those first opportunities was so meaningful. And so I walked down this path. I made it to Blessed Are, and I said, you know what, God, I get it. That's enough. But it underscores for me the appreciation, because I've not been back on campus since that chapel, since I took distance learning, which, by the way, those programs have improved greatly, because I went back to the website. It was, here's your book, here's a stack of papers, fill them out, send it back to us, and we'll tell you how much you don't know. Now they send you an email to tell you how much you don't know. And so between a place that I hold in high regard and an endeavor that I hold in even higher regard, that is that of serving people through the ministry, through sharing your faith in Jesus. Understand, my father-in-law, who's in his mid-70s, was a mechanical engineer and left that with 4 kids to enroll at Baptist Bible College in a place called Clark Summit, Pennsylvania, to pursue his master's in theology, to enter the pastorate. And he spent decades in a place called Skaneateles, New York, the First Baptist Church of Skaneateles, never exceeding more than 110 members, best I can tell, serving, moved to outside D.C., and now just finished his career in Florida, which everybody in New York eventually does. And so I understand and have seen firsthand, whether it's through friendships or through that family relationship, the challenges around ministry. And I recognize not everybody in here will be a pastor. But I thought I'd give you just some observations from a person who works in sports every day and who is begging for that spiritual breath that people in ministry provide. So here's number 1 for you to remember. You take notes every day. You don't have to take notes. But if you remember one element of this, you'll do me an honor. What you're doing is challenging. That's why I only made it through half of the first verse of Psalm 1. And I've got a master's degree in something else that was rigorous. It's challenging because it's academically rigorous, but it's spiritually and personally rigorous. You have every message of why not to do this coming at you. The second is what you're doing is meaningful. I've avoided emotion today. But for me to have a guy named Gene Wilkes, as I spoke to the Dallas Theological Seminary leader board, is incredibly meaningful because of the moments he and I sat through when I chaired a leadership team or chaired deacons in my mid-30s in that church and dealt with the realities of ministry. What you're doing is meaningful because I'm here today in part due to what happened with him and through that local church. What you're doing is important. Of any phrase from the Bible that has crossed my mind over the last couple of years, it's around what's happening in the culture. In fact, I was in New York City because I went to 2 U2 concerts this weekend, one on Saturday night and one on Monday night in the Apollo Theater with 1,500 people, which was awesome. And in between, the group called Third Day, Christian group, who's on their farewell tour at the Beacon Theater. But I had my youngest daughter with me, and we sat for coffee for 2 hours at a table in Times Square each day, and it brings to mind Matthew 9:36 in the phrase, harassed and helpless. The compassion that Jesus had because the people he saw were harassed and helpless. Go downtown, go to the mall, look at your phone, look at the people looking at their phone, look at the media. We live in interesting times. People are harassed and helpless. There's so much information, so much stress. And then if you remember, Jesus said, the workers are few. That's why what you're doing is important, because the workers are few and you will multiply those workers. You, fourth, are important to what you're doing. So I just want you to realize that the first 3 points began with the word what, and then I had to move what 5 words down the sentence, proving I don't have a theological degree, because I would have figured out a way to construct the sentence with what at the beginning. You're important to what you're doing. Again, what Jesus said, the workers are few. If it was easy, if it wasn't rigorous, you probably wouldn't be here. There'd be a whole bunch of other people, and it wouldn't be as meaningful. Whatever's next for you, here's what you're going to find out. This is the 5th point. And it's true no matter what you do. So I became commissioner June 1st of 2015 of the Southeastern Conference. Less than 2 weeks later, there was a shooting in Charleston, South Carolina. The question came, what is your position on public display, state-sanctioned displays of the Confederate battle flag? I thought, well, that's easy because my predecessor has taken a position on that. No, and you know what? There wasn't any textbook ever here, Syracuse, Cortland, wherever I attended. I even went to Laterno College my first 2 years in Longview, Texas. Nobody ever produced the textbook that said, here's how you make those decisions on what to say. It's going to happen to you. So if you're a pastor, you're going to have one of those meetings where they're going to look you in the eye and they're going to say something. Maybe it's your worship minister who says, I'm resigning, and here's why. It's because of you. Or it's your leadership team who says, you know, you're going too long. And I freely admit I'm in that danger zone right now. But I spent a lot of years with a guy named David Platt as my pastor. And if you know anything about David, you're going to be there till 1 o'clock every Sunday. The Baptist tradition ends quickly. If you're a counselor, somebody's going to walk out of the door, and that door's going to close, and you're going to be left with, I don't have anything to say to that person. My buddy Gene, I had a lunch with him and a guy who's struggling with divorce 20 years ago, and I knew that Gene would say, hey, stick it out. God wants you to be married. At the end of that lunch, he said, you need to take care of yourself. This marriage is over. Gene said, how do you think it went? I said, you're not supposed to say that. You're the pastor. And it was an education that it's not as easy as people think. That's why it's meaningful. It's important. That's why it's you here. 6th, if you don't take anything away from this, take this one. If you don't know anything about sports, take this one. Don't sacrifice your family for your ministry. I don't know if you have a class on that subject here. I would submit to you, with all due respect to those of you teaching Greek, that's the most important conversation that should happen. You know what I'm asked when I talk to students on our campuses? So these are secular campuses, and I'll talk all the time. And they ask, how do I become the commissioner of the Southeastern Conference? And I said, I hope it takes you about 10 or 15 years to figure it out because I'll be retired at that point. And then I say, if I could tell you that, I wouldn't tell you. I'd write a book, and I'd hold seminars, and I'd charge you a bunch of money for it because people seem to want the job. You know what's asked in every one of those sessions? Is did you sacrifice your family to get to this position? And the answer is if you asked my wife and my 2 daughters, they'd say no. They said, you know what, somehow he figured out how to prioritize us. He missed some things. He was late a few times for dinner. He might have called and said it's going to be 7 instead of 6:30. And everybody had a meeting of the minds, and it all worked out. But I've also watched people in ministry. I've watched people who coach football, who coach basketball, who say that endeavor is more important. Everybody's watching your family. You know how I know? Because my wife, is a pastor's daughter. And all the stereotypes were supposed to apply. We ought to break some of those. But it's up to you not to sacrifice your family because that'll kill your ministry, in my view. Number 7, last one, is you ought to live the Dallas Theological Seminary mission statement. Not like the big one that's got a bunch of words from 1920-something, and then you click through and there's even more and you have to scroll down. I saw the president. That's great. I'll never be a trustee here based on that statement, which is okay. It's this one. 4 words. Teach truth, love well. Especially those last 2. In fact, I'd submit to you in this city, in this week, there's a call to those last 2 words in an immediate and urgent in a more important way than ever. Because as the denomination in which I've participated for the last few decades meets, and you watch the rhetoric, teach the truth can be there, but it's guided by love well. Love well. And we're going to have disagreements. That's okay. That's part of the deal. In fact, you can look at New Testament examples of that. And I had it when I served on a leadership team in Plano, Texas with my pastor around, do we finance a building campaign or not? And I said, you know what? They disagreed sharply and they went their separate ways, but they never had to tear each other apart. And I'm intimidated because I didn't put in my notes, is it Paul or Barnabas or Paul and Silas? And it just gets confusing, but I know it was Paul and one of the 2. But you're studying that stuff in Greek, so you know what I'm talking about, right? And the point is made in this way. In the Southeastern Conference, September 30th, 1967, a guy named Nate Northington, who played for the University of Kentucky, the game of football, was the first African American to play in a varsity contest in the sport of football between 2 SEC universities. 1967, September 30th. You know, Nate went on to be a pastor in Louisville, Kentucky. Fast forward to December 4th, 1967, a guy from Vanderbilt University by the name of Perry Wallace broke that color barrier in men's basketball. And if you did the math, the reason I raised the issue is last fall we celebrated the 50th anniversary of those 2 moments and how quickly things started to change. But we're still not at the destination. As we honored those moments in the theme of love well, I shared this, and I'll confess, they're imperfect Irishmen, but I listened to their music. It's a U2 song from the 2000 album, All That You Can't Leave Behind. And it's a track that's at the back that you'll miss unless somebody stands in front of you and reads the end of it. It's a song called Grace. Love well. Except love well doesn't rhyme as well as grace. What once was hurt, this is the lyric, What once was hurt, what once was friction, what left a mark no longer stings, because grace makes beauty out of ugly things. What once was hurt, what once was friction, what left a mark no longer stings, because grace makes beauty out of ugly things. I hope you read Greek rapidly. I pray you make it through the course the first time, or at least one of the first 3 times. Don't sacrifice your family, and love well. Thank you.